putting public health as a priority is a decision. It's not a coincidence. And luckily, in Costa Rica, that was a consistent decision throughout many decades. So, one thing is that we benefit from a robust public health system, which I tell people if you have one, keep building, keep protecting it. And if you don't, it's never late to start the legacy of a public health system.
Welcome to the Global Public Health Revolution, the podcast by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, where global public health meets bold advocacy and game-changing marketing to spark real change.
Global public health is at a crossroad, from rising public health emergencies to issues with inequities in governance, as well as dwindling official development assistance. And of course, that means that global leaders need to come together to ensure that we can right the wrongs, particularly from COVID-19 till date, and even before that. So on this episode, we put the spotlight on political will as a decisive, often underestimated force in strengthening global public health. Our guest today is the former president of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado Quesada, whose government steered the country through the COVID-19 pandemic on the strength of a public health system decades in the making, and who has continued to shape global conversations on public health, climate change, and governance since leaving office. Drawing on his leadership in Costa Rica and his ongoing work in global health diplomacy, this conversation will explore what it truly takes politically, institutionally, and personally to build health systems that hold up under pressure, and what it will take to do the same at the regional and global scale. So good to have you on the podcast today, President Alvarado.
No, Kemi, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
I'm excited I'm going to be having this conversation with you because you're no stranger to understanding the role that public health plays in a country's economy or in a country's development. But I want us to start first with your journey. I'm sure many people don't know, especially those who may be out of Latin America or Costa Rica, not knowing that you became a president at the young age of 38. I would say that's like a dream for many people. It would probably be an aspiration. And so you were one of the youngest heads of state in Costa Rica's history. And you since described politics as an act of creation. I actually like that because it is creating things. So what inspired your journey into leadership, your passion for public health, and of course, climate change?
Well, thank you, Kemi. And thanks for having me again. My aspiration was never to become a president. That was not a goal in itself. But I believe that I see life as the possibility and the time we're given in this planet and the use of our bodies and our minds and our energy. I see that the best we can do with it is to create, to transform in positive ways our surrounding, our societies. But also I see it as service. Then I see a strong correlation between leadership and service, because that's what gives purpose to leadership. I know that's not the only approach to it. I see power as a tool for achieving things, and I've seen other approaches that see power as a means to keeping it just to make a living. And that's how I seen it. I'm passionate about it. And I was always passionate about politics as I am passionate about, for example, the arts, because I see politics as a way of creating change and bringing change about, and hopefully good change for people. So I was involved in politics from a young age, but always on the sidelines or always advising or putting my talents in the service of others until I was given more responsibilities. And I realized that if you want change to happen, sometimes it's not enough to advise or to advocate on the sidelines or to vote. Sometimes when you have a vision of what you want to see or what needs to happen, you need to take a step further and take some responsibilities. I learned that because I was aiming for some change, but I saw that perhaps they required more commitment or more responsibility if that wanted to be a reality. So that's how I moved from being just an advisor to being an advisor with more responsibility, then to being a minister. And given the time when an election came, there were many things on the line in my country. One was human rights, and there was a big fight either if we should pursue or continue with preserving human rights in my country or going back. And also, there was a big fiscal situation. The country was indebted and we needed to act. So I decided then to propose my name to the people as a candidate because I thought that this needed action. And that's how I decided to become a candidate. And that's why I ended up being president of my country, which is perhaps the biggest honor to serve to your country.
What was it like for you when you eventually found out that you had become the president? Did you feel like a heavy weight of Costa Rica on your shoulders and how you needed to change that? Because I'm asking because there might be someone who is listening who has a desire to make a change in their sphere of influence or even in their country. And they might be young and probably feel, I'm not sure I can do this.
Well, I have memories of joy and happiness, but that's really brief actually, because it's true. What I felt was a heavy burden. I remember after the celebration when the result was confirmed, coming back to my place, and while we were in the car, and it was after all the noise, it was so silent. I remember feeling that heavy weight because I was not only sure that I was going to assume the responsibility, but also I knew part of the road ahead because the country we were in the verge of defaulting. So it was not like going to start in an easy way. There was a big discussion about same sex marriage in my country, and we were supporting that, and that was polarizing the society. And not to mention, I mean, that was 2018, and not even the slightest idea on the horizon that 2 years later I will be with my team confronting a global pandemic, which was such a challenge. But yes, I felt that. But it's similar when I make an analogy to I have a son too, so I always feel lots of love, obviously, for my son, but particularly I feel a big responsibility. Love is also about responsibility. So I felt that big responsibility, and that was kind of one of the guiding principles because you literally, in a way, the well-being of people, you have a big deal of responsibility in many dimensions.
So thank you for raising the issue of COVID because we're about to pivot to that now. But it also shows how life can throw you a curveball. So here you are, you've just become president and you didn't know that 2 years from then you were going to have to face perhaps one of the biggest crises that you've ever faced as a leader. So let's talk a bit about how you were able to lead Costa Rica to successfully weather the COVID-19 pandemic, largely on the strength that it is a country that its public health system was built starting from the 1970s, right? Because when I think of a system that was so solidly built from the 70s and, you had something to work with, it tells us that public health should not be an afterthought.
Putting public health as a priority is a decision. It's not a coincidence. And luckily, in Costa Rica, that was a consistent decision throughout many decades. So one thing is that we benefit from a robust public health system, which I tell people, if you have one, keep building, keep protecting it. And if you don't, it's never late to start the legacy of a public health system. Usually we don't think about life in this way, but our bodies are our vehicles in life. I mean, that's our tool in which we operate as a society. The collective condition of our health, it's of the essence for good living. But we usually don't think about that way. We think about health up until when we are ill sometimes. And politicians, we love to talk about infrastructure, building infrastructure. And we love, and I say we because I have to recognize I'm a politician, but it's sometimes when you inaugurate a big thing like a road or a dam, you like it because it's big and it's visible and you can show it to people that you're doing things. But sometimes the most important part of society infrastructure, it's people themselves. It's not the roads. That all makes sense because of the people. So public health is investing in the most important infrastructure of a society, which is people themselves. And sometimes the investments in public health can be intangible or perhaps to the not trained eye. I mean, you don't see like a campaign of awareness. That's not something that you inaugurate. It's about prevention or the education or the savings of a pension system, or the savings of health insurance. You sometimes it can become intangible to the walnut train up until when you need it the most sometimes. I'm convinced that if we go through life with our bodies and with our minds, the health is then perhaps one, if not the most important thing. And traditional knowledge says that. People say, well, for a good living, it's love, health, and sometimes money. That's kind of the sayings we have in our societies. Because without health, you can't work. Without health, you cannot thrive or love or have a prospect of what's to come for you or for other generations. So when the pandemic hit, the priority we gave to life was at the center. We understood that the economy was going to be hit it anyway. I mean, if we keep everything open anyway, the tourism was going to come down, the exports were going to be impacted, lots of the economy was going to be impacted. What made the difference is how many lives could you protect in the effort. So other two things that I prioritize, and I'll close with that, were teamwork, because I mean, to perform well, you need the experts, and you need not one expert. You need several views on the room. Even I remember having great trained physicians and people from other fields having the hard discussions, and even the best trained and well-meaning people sometimes will not agree because there's was lots of uncertainty. But leveraging on expert knowledge was of the essence to try to perform our very best. And I think that's one of the problems we're having now. The expert knowledge used to be one of the pillars of public health, but now that expert knowledge competes with anybody making a video and saying nonsense, and they compete at the same level of legitimacy in front of the public, which can harm profoundly public health. So teamwork was at the center of what we did, and also the principles of protecting people and protective life, and using a multidisciplinary expert team to address the crisis.
I'm happy that you bring out the fact that humans are actually the most important infrastructure in public health. Not necessarily the big shiny hospital or the big dam or the big bridge that people can see an inauguration, but also even investing in things like prevention, because we know that prevention is actually cheaper. It's more cost effective than treatment. But yet, most times we don't see that investment or even awareness in prevention. And just like you're saying, it's not so shiny. You don't see the immediate results. And as a result, that also skews how investment is made towards health. So you have this well of experience at a national level. How can you translate that to a global level?
I do believe that certain simple concepts are at the basis of how we behave in regards of health, locally and globally. One concept that I found intriguing is we usually tend in our societies to like solutions that come from the outside. So we love to have to buy a pill to solve the things. And sometimes you do need the pill or the vaccine or the big fancy shiny hospital. But experience demonstrate that daily constant habits, cheaper habits like exercise or some hygiene habits or access to water or nutritious natural food, those kind of things yield better results for health than the more sophisticated, shiny things. And that concept, even though it's so simple, sometimes it's not yet embedded in our societies. And that I see has a big impact in the way we perform. So seeing health as not something that's outside of ourselves, but within, both of how we take care of ourselves and of others, but it's inside of our responsibility. It's a concept that I believe is valuable. Health as not something you grab or you look from outside of yourself, but inside of yourself. It's as a concept, it's easy, but it's tough to embrace it then, because then that has to go into your routines, into how you address life. And sometimes the incentives outside are on the opposite to do that. But that concept, I think it helps. Also, the concept of interconnectedness, that we are not isolated, not locally, not nationally, not globally. In the pandemic, it was evident because we knew we were going to be out of the pandemic. The quicker everybody was safe, the quicker everybody had a vaccine. And that was an easy concept because if you only had certain groups protected, then the global economic crisis or transportation crisis was not going to be over. Nobody was going to be safe until everybody was going to be safe. So that spoke about the necessity of protecting everybody, everywhere, hopefully at the same cost at the same time. But that easy concept was not delivered, perhaps was not the dominant one. And that, for example, was why the deployment of vaccines was not as fast all around the planet. What happened did not happen at the same pace. So access was not equitable throughout the planet. But you see, it was because there was perhaps this impulse of if I protect myself first, I'll be safe first. And no, that delay going out of the pandemic. But you see, sometimes those simple concepts, when they are not the dominant ones and the others are the priorities of political will, then the result is different.
How do we get the global community, global world leaders to see that we cannot continue to treat public health crisis in terms of in silos or for the interest of one region over another, that it is a collective good and it has to protect all of us. Just like you say, no one is safe. If you're not safe, the rest of the world is not safe when we're faced with a public health emergency, an outbreak, or even a pandemic. So how do we fix that? Especially when people say, or you hear that there's not enough funding, there's a dwindling official development assistance. We also have the challenge with the global debt crisis that is affecting a lot of the global South countries. So how do we fix this dilemma that we're in from a political standpoint?
My approach, because I don't believe there's one certainty on this, but if you were to ask me what will be my approach, we don't, as societies and individuals, we don't protect what we don't value, what we don't know it's valuable. And sometimes that's why the saying is that sometimes you don't know what you got until it's gone. Because when it's gone and you say, oh, but, and it's too late, sometimes you say like, but, oh, but it was so important. So how can we act in a way that we don't have to lose what we value to make an effort to protect it? Or in the opposite case, how can we sustain efforts to build those things that eventually we'll value? I like the analogy of big trees and shading. Usually, sometimes we benefit from those shadings, and one day those are gone, and it's until then that we say, oh, but what happened? And then we want to replace it. And they say, yes, we need to wait 20 years for a new big tree to grow. Or sometimes when you don't have that shadow, you say, okay, we're going to start building, we're supposed to plant these trees, but we need to wait a couple of years to see those results. But that's how a public health system or a pension system is built throughout time. And that competes a lot with the logics of democracy, because democracy sometimes is just about the next election. And that competes with the logic of the market and capitalism, because it's sometimes about the next product and the now. So those very embedded logics of democracy, of the traditional capitalist world, compete with logics of long term, in which what you need there, part of leadership is what they call statesmanship or state womanship, let's say too, that you need to put a big course, sell a dream that goes beyond political parties, goes beyond one or two politicians, but it's a course. It's something that's shaping society's growth, and that's tough. That's tough sell, but why it's worth selling it. It's how Kennedy said, we're not doing this because it's easy. We're doing it because it's hard. It's because it's good for people. We need to embark on those tough sales of either preserving the public health systems and innovating them, as you say, make it more sophisticated, but because at first it's just a basic treatment, but when it's well developed, you have societies in which any member of the society in a robust solidarity and a universal system can access the most sophisticated treatments because of rights of approach. I like to see health as a human right, that everybody, regardless of their upbringing or how much cash they have in their bank accounts, they have access. But that requires steady helm and constant recognition and discussion with societies of why are we building this, or why have we built this, and why we have to take care of it, of this big shady, with big tree with a huge shade that is protecting all of us.
So COVID-19, dengue, Ebola, Mpox, Marburg, you name them. They've all shown us that public health emergency responses, they need to be more decentralized. You shared from your own experience with COVID the fact that vaccines didn't get to everyone as fast as it should have. And then that also begs the question of the fact that we have such a top-down approach when it comes to public health emergency response. And there have been calls around decentralizing that, making that now bottom up instead of top down. And that's to ensure that there's rapid, effective, and equitable response. And because of that, we're seeing a rise in the need to strengthen regional approaches. So regional institutions, regional approaches, but also the need for a new global health architecture that transforms global health in a way that is equitable for all. What's your take on this?
I think there are elements that need to be improved. When we were in the pandemic, we knew that our best allies involved people in their communities. So it's a team effort. That brings me to how we see these efforts, because as you say, our concept, embedded concept, it's a pyramid or a top bottom. I like to think of it. It's not like a top bottom. We're teams in different parts of the game. In the central government, probably you need to organize the funding, the knowledge, the measures, but you're teaming up. What you're doing is enabling and empowering other players in this game. And this is actually the people that are on the ground, in the front lines. They have to have the best knowledge, the equipment. They need to be enabled. People in their communities, they really care about, because it's about their community, their friends, their families, the people around them. So I think that shift we need to, at least at the national level, we need to see ourselves as player in the same team with different roles. Because when we see it only from a hierarchical point of view, there comes this vision of power of control as well, which I believe sometimes, I understand why it's necessary, but I like to think of it more in terms of collaboration. And that will be similar regionally. But then there are obviously dynamics of power between the North and the South. But if we see ourselves less in power and control, more as synergies and collaboration, I also think our results will be way different in terms of how we perform. Well, we need to understand that this also is connected with not only with public health, but with economy and with sometimes with intellectual property and wealth and other dynamics that coexist with this. I do believe that's why also the role of politicians to prioritize health, and health, as I see it, as a human right, the right of health, not a right or not an access that you can only buy, depending on the amount of money you have. But because you're a human being and you're in this planet, you have the right to access the means so you can thrive. Your body, your mind can thrive, and also the environment around it, because that's also the connection with environment, climate change. Because you can try to put all the medicine and all the things in your body to be healthy, but if your surrounding environment is unhealthy, it's polluted, is extremely warm, is prone to droughts or prone to flooding, you cannot thrive in health.
As you speak, just maybe for listeners who may not know, your passion, because you're also a climate change champion. And we're seeing a lot of conversation about the intersection between climate and health, and how we need to be able to address the two of them together. But I want to ask you, in terms of regions, so just going back to the conversation on regional institutions and regional approaches, do you see a place for them, especially as the world, tries to build back from COVID and rethink our global health system?
I have been for a while already admiring a lot the leadership of the African continent in this matter and others. I mean, it's not coincidence that as the African continent developed its own CDC, its own response, for example, that the African Union got a seat in the G20, or that it's the continent that has the prospect of growing both economically and in population the most in the next couple of decades. I mean, there's a tendency that all goes together, not without challenges. I know it's not. I mean, you see the different challenges throughout the whole continent, but you see some level of coherence and awareness on leadership of what the role should be. And I've said that because I've even written that that's a, a- that's a that's a burst or a tendency that my region, Latin America, lost in the last couple of decades. We used to play more like a team. Now we are scattered. For example, the FAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, actually, FAHO precedes the World Health Organization. FAHO was created before because there was a regional awareness of not only the importance of health, but how interconnected we are. Because in terms of health, it's not like you can put a boundary or a wall and not be connected to the other countries surrounding you because of the nature of our interconnected existence, something that we don't necessarily embrace as a reality. We tend to think that we can just close borders and we can keep living as you, and that's not the case. I mean, that's not the case for viruses. That's not the case for goods and services. That's not the case of money flows or migrants. But we've lost, I think, in Latin America and globally. I've seen with preoccupation how the World Health Organization funding is at risk, how many countries have withdrawn. I mean, conventional thinking will make you think that you will be more prepared. But what the signs I see are not necessarily those that we are more prepared, at least all of us. That requires also leadership. I don't see anything as material as taking care of the health. It's similar with climate change. People tend to see it separated, and it's all connected. It's not like you can say, oh, I'm passionate just about this fragment of existence, this, and I'm not. It's all very much pretty much connected.
Yeah. So on the regional institutions, you've talked about, Latin America a bit. There have been calls by public health experts and some leaders on the need for Latin America to have a public health mechanism, even though, yes, there's PAHO, but to have a public health mechanism that is similar to the Africa CDC or even the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA, so that it can help to strengthen the regional coordination, operational integration in public health, particularly for emergencies and response. What are your thoughts about that?
I do believe that given that there is a legacy, it cannot necessarily be a copy of what the African continent has developed. I think we need to learn from that experience and perhaps adapt or be inspired to what we need now. I wish it was more strong to build this kind of infrastructure or efforts, but the polarization regionally, if a government is left wing and a neighbor is right wing, and then they change, sometimes they are more close, sometimes they are far away. I use the example of, in this case, of the European Union. You have leaders from the right, leaders from the left, center, even sometimes even the extremes, but their architecture forces them to work together. I mean, and they have to be sitting all and have agreements because of their architecture. Well, we don't have that, and sometimes when they don't agree, literally communication is halted. But what I see as a big possibility, and I believe more and more, going back to the to efforts in that analogy of the pyramid from top, bottom, and bottom up, I see the possibility of collaboration through civil society, through research center, through scientists, because I do, and whenever I speak with those experts, they are really worried about what can make happen. So to have that capillarity, that means of communication, of sharing, of rapidly acting, because one thing is true, when if there's a need in a future event, one way or another, governments are going to reach out to specialists. So to build that knowledge and build that infrastructure from civil society and from the experts and from people on the ground, to have that in place, um, just in case things turn out in that direction, will yield lots of results. It's like having those preemptive emergency systems, in communities where they have the walkie-talkies and they can speak, say, in the level of the river, or they are checking on the possible landslides on the mountains. And that's very valuable because that helps life. When people have the walkie-talkies and nothing's happening, lots of people are tempted to say, well, that's a waste of effort. Until somebody grabs the walkie-talkie up river and says, people downriver, watch out, there's a big, I don't know, event happening that may be threatening your life. Similarly with help, we have to have those preventive systems into place just in case. And that's a valuable investment because that protects lives.
So how can Latin America and the Caribbean champion global public health as a global public good?
Well, we can also remember that in the past we were leading many of the efforts. During my administration, I remember that we were deploying the first in the planet, the vaccine for human papillom, and that proved to be a big success, and to protecting children from this, and it was deployed nationally in a couple of weeks, and so we have, when we commit to this, we can deliver in top of the class in the planet. But I think sometimes we forget that we have this capability. Luckily, let me tell you something, Kemi. When you look at the results of the pandemic, of how it was, and you look some research from the former head of Johns Hopkins Public Health, which is currently in, I believe it's in Hong Kong school now. She divides the world in the different quintiles of excess mortality in COVID. In the best performers, you have countries like Denmark or Iceland or Qatar. You have wealthy small countries in that list. But then you have Costa Rica in the first quintile, less excess mortality, which is not an island. It's very connected. It's small, yes, but it's not wealthy. And lots of people ask, why is Costa Rica there? Is there a problem with the data? And one of the conclusions is that your performance is not necessarily connected to your wealth. There were very wealthier countries that perform not as well, but it's connected with your systems, with your political leadership, with the willingness of the population. So that means that in this critical area of health, human health and society's health, it's not about how wealthy you are, but how prepared you are. Many of the great investments are not of lots of money, but on good habits, on awareness of collective action. And for that, what you need is the power of the people, not the power of the dollar.
I like how you frame it in terms of it's not about the size, it's your organization. It's also the ability to be proactive, right? It's to have foresight. Also
and that
the
requires
analogy.
lots of leadership.
Exactly. And I like your analogy on the tree, because sometimes we wait until it's gone to start a plan, but then it takes years before we can catch up. And that's, I think you're dropping really key points for global leaders, and even at national level, not just even at global and even at regional level, to take into account on how we can strengthen our public health systems. Performance is not based on the wealth or the size. It's one, the willingness to act, right?
Yeah. No, I think it makes me think of again. I think there's a saying also connected to that, the tree analogy, that says something like, "Bless the ones that are fostering the shade that they won't benefit from, or they will not." Yeah, because it's people that have a vision.
Think about the generations. Yes,
Yeah, that they are
foresight
building
and
something
vision.
that it's not necessarily be for them, but for the next generation to
Absolutely.
to enjoy.
Yeah. So you are a man of many talents. I know you studied journalism. You also international development, political science. You are in a lot of things, a lot of awards. You've gotten fellowships and all. I think that's very impressive. But you're also a member of Club de Madrid, right? So I wanted to find out from you, as a member of Club de Madrid, how the organization is helping to advance.
Well, Club of Madrid, it gathers, is the largest forum of former heads of states and former prime ministers of the democratic world. It's over 100 members, and from more than 70 countries, and I'm honored to be one of member of Club of Madrid, and we get involved in different causes, again, to try to influence positive causes. And one is public
Mm,
health, especially during and after the pandemic. Many of the members we have embarked in not only in supporting the negotiation of the pandemic treaty, but getting involved into these causes of building awareness of public health as
mhm.
a common good for societies, and why we need to invest, and why with in our context is sometimes at risk because of what we have discussed. So Club Madrid is involved in many of these aspects, trying to advocate in the direction that mostly what we have kind of the discussions we have had during podcasts. So that's where Club of Madrid is pushing into that direction.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I know you've dropped a lot of key insights from a leader's standpoint and an influential voice, but I just wanted us to wrap this part of the podcast with a message from you to world leaders, when it comes to public health. What will be your call to action to them?
I'll put it this way: if you have to choose between an election or a re-election and public health, I'll choose public health because that grants you a well sleep at night. If you protect public health, you protect life, you protect people, you protect families. And better to protect that than to protect a political career. If you protect public health, you're protecting both. But let's say if you have to choose, I'll choose public health. I'll choose service. If you get into politics, you're getting into public service. And perhaps the biggest service we have to deliver to people is to protect their health.
It makes me remember something that the president of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation once said on this podcast as well, is that there's no public health without the public. So there's no public health without the people. It is the people that makes public health. And when you talk about choosing public health and what it's connected to, I also say it's connected to the economy. It's connected to security. It's connected to development. It's like it's that anchor for everything else to thrive, both nationally, regionally, locally, and of course, globally. Thank you so much, President Alvarado. It's been such an honor talking with you and just discussing this topic. Your wealth of knowledge, experience, but also your enthusiasm definitely shines through. So I want us to end this with something we normally do, which is a fun segment. It's nothing too serious, just for our listeners to get to know a bit more about you outside of your day-to-day work and day-to-day life. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions just to find out more, some of the fun things that you like. And something that you and I have in common is that we're both members of the Chevening Alumni Network. So we were at some point recipients of the Chevening scholarship. So I wanted to find out from you, what was your fondest memory when you were a Chevening scholar?
I think that I enjoy my time a lot. I learn a lot in the UK. In my case, in the IDS, in the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex University. But I have to say that even though I learn a lot in the classroom, perhaps my fondest and my best learnings came out of the pub.
Mhm.
So, so how diverse and multicultural it was. It was my first time being with people from India, from all over the African continent, from Europe, and it was just like young people. It was like the United Nations young people together, and sharing with that many people in an environment not only of intellectual environment but environment of sharing
Mhm.
and having fun.
I couldn't agree more. So what's your favorite music to listen to?
I like rock and roll. I like classic rock. I like what they call progressive rock.
So
That's
what's your
my thing.
favorite rock band?
I have many, but I have to say it's somewhere between Pink Floyd from the UK, or
Okay.
Rush from Canada.
Good choices there. So when you're not working, when you're not doing the heavy lifting of global health diplomacy or climate change action, what do you do for fun?
I hang out with my son, and that could be just watching a soccer game or playing ball. I also like a lot to study, to read. That really relaxes me. I mean, there's so many mysteries and so many fields that I think we should all have the chance at least to know a little bit about everything.
Thank you so much, President Carlos Alvarado Quesada. It's been such an incredible honor to have you on the Global Public Health Revolution podcast and just listening to you. And I hope that the next time we're calling you, you'd be more than happy to spend the time with us to talk about, global health and of course the things that you're very passionate about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kemi.
Thanks for being part of the Global Public Health Revolution. We hope today's conversation left you inspired, challenged, and ready to shake things up. If you loved this episode, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your network. Let's keep the momentum going.